In the summer of 1972, British families set sail across the Pacific Ocean on what was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. But just a few weeks in, something slammed into their boat with such force, it tore the hull wide open. Within 60 seconds, their dream and their only lifeline was gone. And now, 6 people, including 2 children, found themselves floating in the middle of the world's largest ocean, with no radio, almost no food, and predators circling below. For the next 38 days, what they had to do to survive would shock the world. And it's a story most people have never even heard of. Alright, so let me set the scene for you. This is 1971, and Dougal Robertson, a British dairy farmer from Staffordshire, is having what you might call a midlife crisis. But instead of buying a sports car, this guy decides to sell his entire farm and buy a boat. Not just any boat, mind you. He buys a 43-foot wooden schooner called the Lucette. Now, Dougal's wife Lynn probably thought he'd lost his mind, but their 9-year-old twins Neil and Sandy, they were absolutely thrilled. In fact, it was Neil who first suggested the idea. "Daddy's a sailor. Why don't we sail around the world?" So that's exactly what they did. In January 1971, the Robertson family, Dougal, Lynn, their 18-year-old daughter Anne, 16-year-old son Douglas, and the 9-year-old twins, set sail from England. Their plan? Sail around the Atlantic, through the Caribbean, and across the Pacific. The adventure of a lifetime, right? For over a year, everything was perfect. They'd made it through the Caribbean, crossed the Panama Canal, and were now sailing west across the Pacific toward the islands. But on the morning of June 15, 1972, roughly 200 miles west of those famous islands, something was about to turn their dream voyage into a nightmare. So here's what happened. It's about 10 in the morning, calm seas, beautiful day. Lynn was down in the galley making tea. The kids were doing their usual morning routines. Dougal was at the helm, probably thinking about what a perfect day it was for sailing. Then, out of nowhere, Douglas spots something in the water. Dark shapes moving fast toward their boat. Really fast, before anyone could even process what was happening. A pod of killer whales. Orcas slammed into the Lucette's hull. Not once, but multiple times. These weren't playful bumps, okay? These were deliberate, powerful strikes that punched holes straight through the wooden planking. Now, you have to understand, this boat was their entire world. It had all their food, their water, their navigation equipment, their radio, and within minutes, all of that was disappearing beneath the Pacific Ocean. Dougal later described it as watching their life literally sink away. The family had maybe 5 minutes to grab whatever they could before the Lucette went under completely. 5 minutes to save their lives. So here's where things get real fast. The Robertson family scrambles into their life raft, a small inflatable thing that was never meant to hold 6 people for more than a few days. They also managed to get their tiny dinghy, the Ednam, which was barely 9 feet long. Think about this for a second. You've got 6 people, 4 adults, and 2 9-year-old kids, floating in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The nearest land is hundreds of miles away. No radio, because that went down with the ship. No GPS, because this is 1972, and here's the kicker. They weren't expected anywhere for 5 weeks. 5 weeks. That means nobody would even start looking for them for over a month. Their supplies, 24 tins of food, some biscuits, and about 10 gallons of water. For 6 people, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You do the math. That's not going to last long. But Dougal Robertson was no ordinary farmer. This guy had served in the Royal Navy, and he immediately took charge. He rationed the food, organized watches, and tried to keep everyone's spirits up. But even he knew they were in serious trouble. After about a week, their situation became truly desperate. The water was running out, the food was nearly gone. Everyone was starting to feel the effects of dehydration and starvation. The twins, Neil and Sandy, were crying constantly from thirst. That's when Dougal made a decision that would haunt him for years. When they caught their first sea turtle, he knew they had to use every part of it to survive. I mean, every part. The family ate the meat, of course. But when the kids were dying of thirst, Dougal had them drink the turtle's blood. Fresh turtle blood. I can't imagine what that must have been like for a 9-year-old, but it was literally keeping them alive. They collected rainwater whenever storms passed through, using every piece of fabric they had. They learned to catch fish with improvised hooks. They caught and ate sharks. Raw shark meat because they had no way to cook it. But you know what? Even with all these desperate measures, they were still slowly dying. Just when you think things couldn't get worse, they did. After about 3 weeks at sea, their life raft started failing. The constant exposure to salt water, the beating sun, and the sharp fins of the sea life they were catching had torn holes in the fabric. So now they had to abandon the raft completely and squeeze all 6 family members into that tiny 9-foot dinghy, the Edna Mare. Picture this: 6 people, including 2 children, crammed into a space smaller than most people's bedrooms. For weeks, the sun was relentless. Everyone developed saltwater boils, these painful, infected sores that just wouldn't heal. Their skin was blistered and raw. They were skeletal from starvation. And they were still hundreds of miles from anywhere. Douglas, the 16-year-old son, later said that by day 30 they'd given up hope of rescue. They were just trying to survive one more day, then one more day after that. On day 30, something appeared on the horizon. A ship. Can you imagine the surge of hope they must have felt? After 30 days of hell, finally, rescue was coming. They fired their flares. They waved everything they had. They shouted until their voices gave out. But the ship was too far away, and it passed without seeing them. That moment, watching potential rescue disappear over the horizon, nearly broke them completely. Lynn later said that was the closest they came to giving up entirely. But somehow, they kept going. They caught more turtles, collected more rainwater, and held on to each other. Because at that point, that's all they had left. Then, on July 23, 1972, day 38 of their ordeal, a Japanese fishing vessel called the Tokamaru spotted something unusual floating in the water. The crew of the fishing boat couldn't believe what they were seeing. 6 skeletal figures huddled in a tiny boat, barely conscious, sunburned beyond recognition. The Robertson family had lost a combined total of over 150 pounds. The twins, who had been healthy 9-year-olds when this started, were now just skin and bones. When the Japanese fishermen pulled them aboard, Dougal Robertson could barely speak. But the first thing he managed to say was thank you. The family had drifted over 750 miles during their 38 days at sea. The Robertson family's survival made headlines around the world. When they arrived in Panama a few days later, international press was waiting for them. Their story was so incredible that many people initially didn't believe it. But here's what's really remarkable. None of them regretted the voyage, even after everything they'd been through. Douglas Robertson said years later, "I never regretted the trip, even in the darkest hours." Dougal wrote a book about their experience called Survive the Savage Sea, which became a bestseller. Douglas later wrote his own account, The Last Voyage of the Lucette, filling in details his father had left out. The family's story became a case study in survival psychology and maritime safety. It showed the world what humans are capable of when pushed to the absolute limits of endurance. But perhaps most importantly, it reminded us that, even in our modern world, with all our technology and safety systems, we're still just fragile creatures trying to survive in a vast, indifferent ocean. The Robertson family faced that reality head-on for 38 days, and somehow, against all odds, they won. So the next time you're facing what seems like an impossible situation, remember the Robertson family. Remember that sometimes survival isn't about having the right equipment or the perfect plan. Sometimes it's just about refusing to give up one day at a time. The Robertson family's 38 days adrift remains one of the most incredible survival stories ever recorded. 6 people, including 2 young children, survived in conditions that would have killed most of us within days. If this story amazed you as much as it amazed me, make sure to subscribe for more incredible, true survival stories. And let me know in the comments, could you have survived what the Robertson family went through? Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most extraordinary human stories happen in the most ordinary moments. You just never know when your own test of survival might begin.